I'm Dean of Douglas Residential College, and I'm so happy to be here presenting Majora Carter as the main speaker in our 2010 Douglas Women in the Age of Globalization series. I want to thank very much the Vice President for Undergraduate Education, Barry Qualls, for helping support this lecture. And the Department of Human Ecology, which has been so supportive, and so many faculty from environmental science and all over the university. Thank you so much. And thank you to all the students who've come. Many social justice groups, environmental groups, people, Engineers Without Borders, all kinds of students who've been very interested in this lecture, and thank you so much for supporting it. Douglas is a very unique institution. Here we are in the middle of a public research university, the only public research university with a women's residential college. The real commitment that Rutgers has to women's education is palpable here at Douglas. And we particularly are focused on women's leadership, and women's leadership in particular in minority communities. And Majora Carter embodies that and exemplifies the power that women can have, even young women. You think you seem old, but I think you seem so young. When we look around us today and we think about all the many issues facing us, it's been a really terrible time. Young people want to help. They don't know how to help. They don't know what issue to choose. So many things seem pressing on us. Issues of jobs, of food, of health, of security. For many people, environmentalism has seemed like a luxury. Certainly when I came of age in the 70s, environmentalism was really seen as a middle-class luxury. We can't do environmentalism. Majora Carter has been the most forceful voice for letting us know that is just not true. And tonight we are going to hear about that. Let me just say a few words about her amazing career. She founded Sustainable South Bronx and created the Sustainable South Bronx's green-collar job training and placement programs, bringing together environmentalism and job creation. She successfully wrote a $1.25 million federal transportation grant for the South Bronx, something I'm in awe of. That now has 11 miles of alternate transport, local economic development, low-impact stormwater management, then recreational space, leading to the first new South Bronx waterfront park in over 60 years. This is what one determined woman can do. Let me tell you. She is a 2006 MacArthur Award Genius winner. And she hosts a national public radio series called The Promised Land. She's now president of the Majora Carter Group, a green economic consulting firm. We all want to change the world. She is changing the world. Please welcome Majora Carter.
That introduction, Harry. It was funny, as we were leaving one of the spaces we were today, and I was like fumbling with my iPhone. Or no, it's not even an iPhone, it's the new Google phone. Yeah. And I've never had one before, so like my thumbs feel really big. So I was like, thank you for calling me a young woman. Because I'm like, I think kids' thumbs are thinner than mine. But anyway, it really is an honor to be here, and specifically for this event that acknowledges and really exemplifies the work that women have been doing all the time, but often sometimes aren't honored for that kind of thing. So I'm really happy to be here, a part of that. But I gotta tell you, since it is that time of the evening, and for almost to my bedtime, I need a little help from you guys. So I'm gonna ask you all to stand up, please. And because this is the time I have to do my stretches, literally, so that I can actually be up for a little bit longer. So I'm asking you to roll your shoulders back. Okay, thank you. Now forward. It does feel good. You have to admit, right? Okay. And oh God, that thing. Roll your neck around. Not necessarily here it pops the way mine just did. But if it happens, it does. And now I want you to turn and face your neighbor. Okay. And get your neighbor and lift your arms up and really stretch really high. Okay, like that. Wiggle your fingers, and now give your neighbor a hug. I love the guy hugs. Like it's okay. It really is. Like love's a good thing. But yes, I do think hugs will change the world if we do it more often. But I actually want to open this talk actually with a quote. And part of the fun is you guys helping me figure out, or actually I already know who said it, but y'all need to figure out who said it, okay? And so here's the quote. I've been wondering for a long time why some of our own defense officials did not put more emphasis on finding a good substitute for oil and worry less about where more oil is to come from. Our people are ingenious. New discoveries are all around us, and when we have to make them, we nearly always do. For instance, if the war had not made it important, penicillin might still be undeveloped, because it was expensive to do the necessary experimentation. But when it became essential, the expense made no difference. If it is essential to find a substitute for oil or rubber or any other material, I have faith that it can be done, because it has been done in the past. So, show of hands, how many of you guys think Al Gore said that? Let's see. Amory Levin's another really important thinker around there. Okay. Peter Senge, you know, the other guy from the IPC. No, actually. Or not so much up here, but maybe in the back to make it a little easier for folks to see. Thank you. Yes, it was the great lady, Eleanor Roosevelt. She said it back in 1948. Yeah, homegirl was fierce. She also read irrigation maps for fun. In the 1950s, she actually developed, and I don't know for which region, actually recycling plans for pretty large regions. Nobody's been talking about recycling back then, and let's see what else is used. And also the thing that really hits me hard is that way back then she was seriously concerned about what the effect of strip mining and mountaintop removal was actually going to be doing, you know, in Appalachia. She called it. And the interesting thing, well, one of the other many interesting things about her is obviously she was such a human rights activist, and she considered all of these things, you know, the fact, the quest for innovation, actually the way that we could also support human rights for everybody as well. I mean, her concern about figuring out like how do we deal with what we know is a non-renewable resource. You know, I don't know if she was thinking and calling it, you know, way back in the day, that somehow or another that the fossil fuel-based economy was really going to be to our detriment. That the way that it was structured literally had to be, you know, on the backs of many of the folks that are considered disenfranchised now. You know, so whether it's, you know, the places where your oil is actually, you know, where it comes from, or where it's refined, or where it's burned. You know, because I want people to understand that during this talk that the way, if we had built, you know, all of the vestiges of the fossil fuel economy, you know, whether it's power plants-based facilities, et cetera, in wealthy communities, as quickly as we had done in poor communities, we would have had a really clean and green economy a long time ago, and I actually would probably not be addressing you today. With that in mind, I actually like to tell I like to tell stories, basically. That's what I do. And, you know, a really easy way for me to do it, and also just remind me of who I am and where I'm from, and also where I'd like to go, you know, is by actually taking it real back far. You know, also back to 1948, believe it or not, with my family. This is my mom and dad. They were a part of that great American migration, you know, blacks that were moving up north, you know, away from the South, away from their agrarian roots, in search for a better life. You know, my father was from Georgia, my mom was from South Carolina, and then she was pregnant with one of my older brothers and sisters. I can't remember which one. But they ended up up in the South Bronx in New York City. And at the time, this neighborhood they settled in was called Hunts Point. And it was a mostly white working class community. And it was a really interesting part of America. Because, there were plenty of places like it. It was actually a walk to work community. People lived in the residential section and they walked into the industrial area where they went usually to manufacturing jobs. My neighborhood actually was known as Little Pittsburgh because there was a lot of steel finishing and stuff there, and that was a huge piece of what was done there. White, lots of folks like my parents followed suit from the South and then later on the Caribbean. And a really interesting phenomenon was created by the real estate industry. It was called white flight, where realtors and other folks in the industry would tell white families living in places, just solid working class neighborhoods usually, that the blacks were coming and their real estate values were going to drop, so they should probably sell a little bit less than the house was because, that's really all they're going to get. And then they would sell it to black families, for a better price. And that happened all over, all over the country actually. Another really interesting dynamic was happening around that time, and it was the highway construction boom. Cars became king, and it wasn't just in New York, it was all over the place. But the interesting thing about it, it was done in the absence of planning in many cases. It was just like, how do we move cars? As opposed to the fact that there were people in cars, and many times these people in these cars went through communities and places that had been built over time that actually served a real function. Folks like in New York State, Robert Moses was the name of the guy who literally changed the entire landscape of New York State with the way that he built the highways. He had so much power, he literally did whatever he wanted to do. He had no real love, for poor people of any color. And it was, in particular, in the Bronx, it was really, really sad. We ended up losing about 500,000 people displaced by the highway construction boom. And this is actually one of the most infamous pieces called the Cross Bronx. And it was a predominantly Jewish neighborhood that actually was one of the sites of one of the fiercest, most horrible battles, where they would literally be going in. Robert Moses would have their bulldozers come in and rip the tops off of buildings. You would tell you, look, this building's going to be condemned, but we're going to rip the top off it. Now, elements would go in from the top, and everybody who was living at all the other floors would eventually have to move no matter what. Many residents, if their building's house weren't ripped off, didn't just, he was sadistic, this man. They were just given a month's notice before their building was torn to the ground. And I showed this picture in particular because it kind of looks like it was just splatted down, and because it was. They were thriving whole communities in places like this, and the South Bronx was just one of the places where that happened. Redlining is another term created around that time. Literally, bank presidents and their other, financial industry cronies would get together locally and draw red lines in China marker around places where they were not going to make any kind of investment. And what happens, to a place if you don't upkeep it, don't put in the necessary amounts of money to make sure that kind of thing happens, it's going to fall into disrepair. And that happened a lot. And this is around the time that I came in, early networking opportunity. I'm on the phone with the Easter Bunny, talking to Santa, like, hey, I've been good, make sure you tell so-and-so so I can, clean up this year. Didn't quite work that way all the time. However, it was fun. But this is what I grew up with. That financial disinvestment, the fact that landlords, often found it way more profitable to pay somebody a little bit of money to torch their buildings so they could collect insurance money, because they knew no other money was going to be forthcoming. A lot of landlords, it seemed like a lot of the time, actually literally would hand over the deeds and the keys to people that lived in the building, kind of to absolve themselves of any responsibility, because it wasn't like they were going to be able to sell the places. Real estate values were so low at the time. But these were the kind of things, and that financial, that's very nice. The financial disinvestment really came in like a whole bunch of different ways. So it wasn't just the fact that there wasn't a lot of investment going into the community. It was also that public school programs cut things like music and playgrounds just all the time. And it was a really difficult thing for us to go through. But this is what literally this is down the block from my house, or actually up the block from my house, down the street from my office. But these were the things that this is what we did. The photos I just showed you are actually from my fifth grade Spanish teacher actually did a photo essay with her kids, back in the 80s, actually soon right after I ended up graduating from her class a little bit. And, just like get a photo essay, what does your neighborhood look like? And this picture just every time I see it, it's like this little girl's like this, I'm still here. But even though we knew at some level that our community was not the greatest place in the world to be, it was home to a lot of us, but we also knew that there was danger associated with it. My brother actually did serve 2 tours in Vietnam, but he survived that and came home, and within a year or so was actually gunned down in the neighborhood next to our house. It was all the drug wars there. But all of that really kind of paved the way for the kind of environmental degradation that was coming up. Those manufacturing facilities I told you about, when the financial situation made it so that folks were just not doing business anymore in the States. And moved, there were these big empty warehouses. And what moved in? Waste facilities. Then later on, power plants and things like that came in as well. It's a really difficult time for a lot of people there as well. And we got a lot of things associated with it. So the kind of environmentalism that I do is called environmental justice. And it simply means that no community should have to bear the brunt of lots of environmental burdens and not share some environmental benefits. And basic human rights. Eleanor would agree, right? But that's just not the way it works. I mean, right now you can tell exactly where you're going to find the good stuff like parks and trees, and where you'll find the not so nice things like waste facilities and power plants based on how poor or how dark a community is. So so these things are the kind of things you'll find in my community, but believe me, there are many different, depending on your community. If you go, places in the South, mega hog farms. Mega hog farms do not refer to the size of the hogs; it refers to the number of them in close proximity, and the swine lagoons that result as a result of their excrement being just like dumped in a place, which of course fouls the air and water for everybody nearby. And it's not just that those things are unattractive to be around; they cause some pretty severe health issues. One of the ones that was most horrifying, when we found out about it a couple years ago, Columbia University did this amazing study that conclusively linked proximity to fossil fuel emissions to learning disabilities in young children. And it was just like, we knew there was something else wrong. We just knew it, but we hadn't had like such a clear indication, that what was basically created was a pathway directly, from poor communities to prison. Because we now know that poor kids, can y'all hear me over that? Or it should be, wait. Oh, okay, we're fine, I'm sure. I am such the one to like ignore fire alarms anyway. It's really bad, and I shouldn't have admitted that either. But since you're all here with me and nobody else is moving, it's okay. This kid. But we now know that statistically poor kids, poor communities that do poorly in school have a much better chance of going to jail than they do to higher education. I mean, that's just a stat. Real hard. I don't like it either, but we just know it's true. But, but this is what the fossil fuel economy has done. We used to be a nation of producers. Made in America, or made in the USA. It was not a cover band. It was what we did as a country. It was what we produced, but instead, we've become really dependent, as consumers, on really cheap goods. Made that way, and definitely, some countries that don't necessarily share, our passion, such as it is, for human rights and labor laws and even environmental practices. And those were laws that were really fought for with blood and sweat of many, many, many Americans. And in many cases, what we've done is sort of separate ourselves from that, and even to the point where much of the food we eat, it actually literally has fertilizers, on it made from oil. And we've got to add those because so much of the toxic practices that we use, for our soil right now, actually make the soil infertile, so you have to add that stuff in order to get any kind of nutrient value out of that, but even that we know is suspect. So the fact that we've been, doing this kind of stuff to ourselves makes us, I think we have to think really long and hard about what else, what kind of future do we want to create, as Americans. And so I showed this picture. This is pretty much any mountain, in the Appalachian region. This is what happens after a mountaintop is chopped off, in search of just a few years worth of coal. I show this picture because just a little close-up of these trucks. These are earth mover trucks, and it only takes about a few weeks sometimes, and maybe 24 guys to actually go rip off the top of a mountain this size. Those trucks are about 1.5 stories tall, mind you. And this was the former home, of actually a dear friend of mine. Her name is Judy Bollins, and who is actually one of the nation's fiercest anti-mountaintop removal activists. She's born and raised in West Virginia. Again, 8 generations of her family were born, in the hollow of what used to be that mountain. And I got to see it literally with her, and to see the rape of the land in such a way, with the eyes of a person who'd actually been there, was possibly one of the most powerful things that I ever experienced. And they're trying to actually put wind turbines on top of the mountains that are still there, as a renewable energy source, because we know that our dependence on coal is actually not, if we're not careful, could just make life even more difficult for us. And this is just a sample of this type of tap water that comes, into people's homes as a result of the mountaintop removal operations. So whether it's, the fact that lots of folks down there actually need to buy water just to wash their hands because they can't use what's coming out of the sink, or asthma in our cities, or diabetes and obesity, all of these things are actually related to the environmental issues that are apparent in our communities. But the same way that we now know that environmental, Judy and I understand that environmental injustice absolutely, ties us together, because yes, she's on the actual production side, and where I'm from is where we actually burn the stuff to make the energy. But we also know that environmental justice, in search of it, is actually what's going to support us. The back of my T-shirt actually, when we met, we swapped T-shirts. She's green the ghetto, and I'm stopping mountaintop removal. The back of my T-shirt actually reads, "Save the endangered hillbilly." And so, look, if hillbillies and homegirls can actually get together enough to understand that this is big, and that we've got some work to do that I think anybody on the planet can, because yeah, she is like my sister, like you would not believe. And but how did I get into this stuff? I mean, now obviously I drank a lot of the Kool-Aid, clearly, but but that was not always the case. I grew up in the South Bronx, and I grew up hating it. I watched it on the nightly news. Like, I knew what it was like to be the butt of jokes when you walked into a room and knew full well that because of where you were born, that people automatically assumed that you were either a pimp, a pusher, or a prostitute, or knew someone that was, and probably they were your mother or your father. And it didn't matter, what you were or what dreams you had. I mean, this is what I knew growing up. And so I spent an enormous amount, of most of my formative years, like, pretending that I was from someplace else, especially when I went away to college or whatever. And but the best thing in the world that ever happened to me was actually getting into graduate school and being utterly and completely broke, and having to move back home with my parents. And the last thing in the world I wanted to be was there, but it was one of those things that I came face to face with the fact that our city at the time was planning on building these huge waste facilities on our waterfront. And I didn't know anything about it. I knew sometimes the neighborhood smelled funny. That I knew, which is one of the reasons why I didn't want to be there. But I didn't know why. But there was this news, they were building this big, huge state-of-the-art facility, in our waterfront. And then I find out that we were already handling 40% of the city's commercial waste. And this new facility would have brought an additional 40%. And I was like, why here? As we can't be producing all that waste. And it just became, and the more I dug, the more I researched, the more I realized that it was because we were a poor community of color, and they figured we wouldn't notice. and that it was a highly discriminatory act, you know, by our city and state government, because they figured they got so much, and this is where the regulations say it can go, and they're not gonna fight. And they were very wrong. Because there was a lot of folks, you know, at the time who were just starting, you know, to get an understanding, and I was one of them, you know, an understanding that this did not need to continue in that vein. And so I got into it and started working, you know, specifically around solid waste management and really trying to figure out, like, how do we help educate our community around it and, you know, talk some sense into our policy, you know, officials, et cetera. But the real reason that I actually stayed in this work is because of this dog. Around the same time we were fighting against the waste facility, and it was a fight, and I'm glad we fought it, and eventually we were able to win and actually create some real sensible policies around it. I got her, and she was, you know, an abandoned puppy, literally, and not what I was thinking about taking home with me, but, you know, she came, and warmed her way into my heart. She is the cutest thing, I know, she really is. Her name is Zena. And around the same time, I kept getting these notices with this group that wanted to do Bronx River restoration projects. Now, I'd seen maps, I knew we had something called the Bronx River Parkway, and so, but it was just like, and even when you went over the Bruckner, you know, Expressway, which I did to go, because there was another park like 2 miles away, it didn't look like the river you wanted to be associated with. I was like, whatever. But anyway, I got her, and she's like 80 pounds, okay? At the time, she was really frisky and like totally was just a monster of a dog. And so she pulled me into what I thought was this illegal dump. And it was an illegal dump. I mean, it was disgusting. Like, for decades, folks have been dumping construction and demolition debris and like just some really unmentionable things that you find in places where people don't think people are looking. But what I did not know was that this dump dead-ended at the Bronx River. And if you sort of didn't look back at the crap behind you and just looked at the water, and it could not have happened at a more magical moment. It was like this ridiculously beautiful spring morning. There was a cloud in the sky, and the sunlight glinting off the water actually made it look gold. And I was like, I'm 6 blocks from my house. How did, no, I cannot believe it. But anyway, I didn't start even taking pictures of this stuff until like after a gajillion cleanups. It didn't occur to me that I should be documenting it. So this was after many, many cleanups. And you know, me doing the cleanup, getting a whole bunch of folks working with us. And we also work specifically rallying the business community, even working, you know, with the part of city government that actually talked to us, which was helpful. And we were able to take this little tiny seed grant that we got to do the initial work, leverage that thing a lot into this $3 million park. And it was this just, you know, remarkable labor of love to get it to this point, obviously. But once it was built, and even in its, you know, different incarnations, you know, from like, you know, just having like wood chips on it, you know, to this, people really got to connect with the water. They understood, and once it was in this form, it was just like, it was over. People could not believe that there was something as beautiful in their community, and it was theirs to enjoy. It was not going to be taken away from them, and it was just there for them. And this was like such an amazing, you know, thing for folks to understand and to feel. And I actually ended up getting married there back in 2006, and yes, Zena was my flower girl. Yeah, I know, that's my puppy. But it was such an awesome thing, you know, to be in that space. And it also, I think, what it did also do was actually help people realize that, you know what, we could even be doing more here, you know, in the Southwest. What else? You know, do we have to be defined by the fact that we've got nothing but waste facilities here? What else can we do? And it was a really wonderful moment. Oh yeah, sorry. This is another reason why I like to show pictures, so I can see pictures of my, like, you know, good parts of my life. It was very good. But what it also did was also help us understand that there was more out there. And, you know, I actually got hip to the idea that there were these things called greenways, you know, places like Amsterdam and Bogota, Colombia, and you know, there are these dedicated bicycle paths, you know, walking paths, and they do all these really cool things that connect you to different parks. And I was like, why don't we have that in our communities, and you know, and figure out ways to reroute trucks there so we could actually like enjoy it. And so I was able to write this $1.25 million grant, which was the largest, you know, infusion of planning dollars for a good reason to come to our community ever. And, you know, we get lots of money to like, how do you make the sewage treatment plant bigger and better? But, you know, something that was just for us, no, this was it. So we actually got that money to actually design and plan for that greenway. And this is this is the street that's leading down to the park. And as they start the construction this spring, this is what it's gonna look like as they do that work. And again, these are like not just beautiful safe places for people to be and to be a part of a community, but they also do these great things, attract stormwater, so they actually also provide an environmental benefit as the trees clean the air, etc. And so greenways, they are these little linear paths, and one of the main functions is actually to connect you to other larger parks. This piece of infrastructure is actually a rail, underneath the rail tunnel that leads to the Randall's Island, which is an awesome park, like 400 acres, like right in the middle of the East River. But we're only separated from the Bronx, from this park by 25 feet of water. This particular pathway is actually going to help us get there in a nicer, really beautiful way. So we're real excited about that. But the thing that makes me the most happy about the work that I was able to accomplish in the South Bronx was actually helping folks make the connection between having both a personal and a financial stake in the environment. And the way that we did that was actually by starting one of the country's first green jobs training and placement systems. When we first started doing waterfront restoration projects, we realized the city was actually bringing people in to do this work. And it was just, it didn't, obviously you needed some training, but it seemed to us in a community that had like 25% employment that it might make sense for us to train some folks to do that work and get them employed, and off the streets and just doing some real gainful employment. And so we were able to come up with a program that taught folks things like wetland restoration, urban forestry management, learning how to clean up contaminated lands, even green roof installation, specifically, and then also teaching folks the kind of life skills and soft skills that many folks didn't get in our community. And specifically, many of the folks that went through our program were formerly incarcerated. Many folks, years of generational poverty, which meant that they often didn't have, an adult in the family that had a job. So the experience of seeing that, when you see that, you know what you're kind of supposed to do. But if you didn't, how would you know, how to be, a leader in your own life? Show up on time, things of that nature, and really be a team player. And we were able to support folks with that kind of training as well. And because of, I think, that combined like hard and soft skill training, we were able to give folks a real leg up. And we were able to boast the kind of job placement rates that a lot of placement programs wish they had. So we're really excited about that. We also wanted to show really specifically that the idea of green really also needed to be this kind of green. This whole idea, like this middle class kind of elitism, environmentalism was just like, it was not going to roll in South Bronx. It was, or any place else, frankly. So what we needed to show was that there was actually jobs attached to this and industries that could be pushed that could create jobs, more jobs around this stuff. So we started our own community-based Smart Roofs program, which is basically a green roof installation program, where in a green roof, very simply, is a sustainable building technique. It's been used in Europe for more than 50 years at this point, where you literally plant a roof. And you do it for a whole bunch of reasons, whether it's stormwater management. They retain about 75 to 90% of the water that falls on it, so that it actually doesn't have to all rush out into the sewage treatment system. It's a green layer, so it cleans the air and actually also provides some insulating factors for your roof, especially in the summertime, so your air conditioning isn't going straight up through your roof, so you're actually saving money and conserving energy that way. Probably wondering why I'm showing people working, because these are green jobs. If you want your roof green, you're not going to send it overseas. You're not going to outsource that work. So this is money that stays in our local economy, which is a really important thing, especially in these days and times. So this roof that we're planting here is actually the roof that I did, or I got done on my roof back in 2005. And a really cheapy way to do it is to plant little seedlings. And so this is my upstairs neighbor who came, of course, to survey it. And he's a big boy now. This is what it looks like now, although right now it's a little brown because it's freezing. And it might still be under snow. But we also wanted to show that there are different types of green roofs that you can do, and there's a lot of variety that you can have up there. Given the structural integrity of your roof, you can grow trees up there, if you want to. And so we wanted to show different things you could do there. So we did a medicinal herb garden, and also we did a little demonstration plot of food as well, just to
show that, you know, with the proper conditions, you could totally do this stuff. And these were the strawberries that I still remember so fondly. And they were just so productive, it was ridiculous. It was so nice to walk into the office and have fresh strawberries waiting. Tell my husband to do that now. Doesn't work that way so much. But anyway, this, and I'm not saying that the kind of work that, you know, the work that greeners do, retain that stormwater, and it's a lot, you know, after a rain, I mean, all it takes is like 1/10 of an inch, you know, to like overwhelm, you know, a traditional, you know, New York City system. And we're not saying that you would ever completely avoid the need for things like these end-of-pipe solutions, like these types of sewage treatment plants in our communities, but why wouldn't you want to see, you know, these used less, considering that they're single use, really ugly, pretty energy intensive, and, you know, not the kind of things that anybody really wants to have around, right? And also think about the fact that there's another really wonderful benefit to this. You know, every urban area, generally about 20% of the surface area of a city is rooftops. So imagine how cool it would be, literally, you know, if we planted, you know, much of that rooftop space, because what this green layer does is actually reduce, you know, the temperature, you know, of a city, or it reduce urban heat island, in fact, which is what we're all dealing with right now, you know, because cities are generally hotter than the surrounding countryside, so this is something that could make life a little bit easier for many of us. And so this type of horticultural infrastructure, whether it's green roofs or urban forestry management, you know, bioswales, all that kind of good stuff, you know, they really do provide the kind of environmental services that we need, especially in terms of stormwater management, you know, reducing our cities, you know, ambient temperature, you know, in terms of global warming. That's obviously, we need to do that a lot more than we do right now. But there are also some other incredible benefits associated with urban greenery in particular, which is the fact that there have been tremendous amounts of studies that show that just the presence, you know, of it and working with greenery actually does some tremendous things in terms of social, you know, issues as well. One of my favorite studies was actually done by the University of Illinois, Laboratory for Landscape and Human Health, where they did this study at Cabrini Green, which was a notorious housing project in Chicago. And then they did this study where they had control of an area in their project that had no trees, and an area of a project that had some tree, you know, presence of trees nearby. And they noticed that the kids who were, you know, in the area that had trees had higher test scores, that there was lower stress rates in the adults, you know, that lived near the trees, that girls' self-esteem was higher. And how did they indicate that? Because there was less teenage pregnancy in those areas. And that even the crime rates were lower. Because why? People were outside more, actually being engaged in more positive things with each other, rather than like creating opportunities for worse things to happen. And so that was a really powerful, powerful thing when you realize that, you know, how cool would it be if there was opportunities, you know, for people who actually needed these work, like, you know, whether it's folks who had been in prison, those who have been around in generational poverty, actually had the opportunity to work with these kind of things, create the kind of environmental services that we need, and actually bring the community benefits of actually having taxpayers instead of tax burdens, you know, in our communities. And that's the kind of green jobs that I'm really interested in seeing more of happening, you know, as we go forward. Now, I have another little quiz for you. Now, most people know at least one of the answers to this question. The second one is not so much. So the USA, 5% of the world's population, 25% of it's what? Definitely it's greenhouse gases. Yeah, absolutely. What a lot of folks don't know is this one. 25% of the world's incarcerated population is right here in the land of the free. Right here. And now, environment, what is she talking about? You know, lots of people know, you know, that, you know, remember, this young guy, darling child, that, you know, proximity to fossil fuel emissions actually causes learning disabilities in little kids like this, making them better candidates, you know, for this, rather than places like this. And, you know, so we know that. And we also know that there are, you know, I think we're still building about 2 power plants, coal-burning power plants, somewhere in the world each and every week. Something crazy like that. And we know the impact this kind of stuff has on the global environment. No no advantage, but, well, there are some folks that don't think it's a big deal, but most people think it's a problem. But we generally don't necessarily see how the two are combined, because as we think about what outsourcing does, remember the whole idea that, you know, instead of becoming a nation of producers, or instead of staying a nation of producers, we've consistently been a nation of consumers. And the stuff that's made, you know, in not so great conditions, you know, across our waters, definitely, you know, the kind of manufacturing that used to be here, the kind of production that actually did provide stability all over this country, you know, whether it was Rust Belt or, you know, South Bronx, you know, those things are just going by the wayside. And the idea that we now have an opportunity to think about what the green economy can actually mean is a really powerful, powerful thing for us to do going forward. One of the things that we really were interested in doing was actually looking at what some of our problems were and seeing proactive solutions around them. One of them was the fact that in the South Bronx, we have a huge amount of waste facilities there, right? And much of it is recycled material. And we knew that because of our research that there were things that actually you could do stuff with this stuff instead of it ending up sometimes in a landfill, you know, in communities that often look like ours, at least poverty-wise. And so we discovered this really awesome, you know, concept that has been used in Europe a lot called an eco-industrial center, where you literally have a collection of businesses that use recycled materials as raw materials. We found businesses that wanted to locate in the South Bronx, even had a great site that we just knew was going to be awesome. You know, what are the kind of things that could be made from stuff like that? You railroad ties, you know, just recycle stuff and put it together so that it actually has value and turned into another product. And again, these are also jobs that have to stay local, and it also reduces solid waste as well. The real reason why we wanted to do this is because the South Bronx is one of the poorest congressional districts in the country, and we wanted desperately to make an impact on that as well. The thing that was most really horrible about finding that, because we just thought we had just done some really great stuff, that we had found, you know, a piece of land that could actually really be useful and create some wonderful opportunities. And then we found out later that our city was planning on using that very same site, you know, for a 2,000-bed jail. And it was one of those things that just made you go, why would you set us up for this when there are so many other opportunities that you could be doing right now? And we haven't, you know, won this battle just yet, you know, in helping the city understand that it's probably a better idea to make folks taxpayers instead of tax burdens. But I think I'm hopeful that we will. But all of that work to say, you know, really helped me understand that there were some amazing things that we could be doing, both inside and outside of the Bronx. And I made a decision a couple years ago to leave the organization I founded, Sustainable South Bronx, and start my own green economic development consulting firm called the Majora Carter Group. And the idea was to help business leaders, you know, municipalities, even community groups really understand, the foundations, you name it, really see how their self-interest could be served by helping to support the green economy. So that if everybody's self-interest is being served in some way, that's a great thing. And our role was really help to figure out projects that actually allowed that to happen to a broad spectrum of people. And so one of the projects we're working on now is in northeastern North Carolina, where we're working, you know, to help that region develop some climate adaptation strategies that actually put people to work. That region falls right behind the Mississippi Delta and the Florida Everglades as one of the areas in the country that's going to be most impacted by sea level rise over the next 20 to 30 years. Like right now, pieces of the Atlantic seaboard are literally being stripped into the ocean after pretty much every 100-year storm, which actually happens a lot now. And it's a really, you know, it's a very, very poor region, predominantly rural, but one in which, you know, is aching to find, you know, a place in any economy. Used to be lots of tobacco. You know, that's not so much anymore. And still believe it's still there. But, you know, folks are looking for different ways. These places are also struggling with huge stormwater management bills and, you know, populations, you know, unemployed, and also high crime rates as well. We're working with a whole bunch of folks to help figure out how to, like, usher in the new economy around climate adaptation. So storm bank restoration. How do you plan communities when you know that the climate is changing as you speak? And what do you need to do to prepare your communities for that? What kind of workforce do you need to make sure that that is not so it's not gonna like catch you by surprise? And I'm so grateful to be a part of that right now. and also dealing with some of the agricultural runoff issues, that are also down there as well. We were, inner city Detroit, those who haven't seen what it's been looking like over the past, several years right now. Detroit's huge, 140 square miles. 50 miles of it are either completely vacant or with blighted properties on it right now. And so they call these areas urban prairies, because there used to be, infrastructure there. There still is infrastructure there, but there's no houses because they tear them down because they actually do all sorts of, bad things to everything when they're up and blighted. So but I have to say, a thing that I was most in love with about this city, was the resilience of so many of the people there. Like, there is already this incredibly strong urban farming movement there, because actually Detroit doesn't have any grocery store chains in the inner city. Not a one. The last one moved out, I think, 2 years ago. So if you want some decent, affordable produce, you're probably growing it yourself if you really want it. So there's this move to take over some of the vacant lots to do that type of work. But one of the things that we wanted to do was actually think about, what's happening in urban areas all over the country. Lots of places are suffering from being a food desert, where you actually have kids suffering from malnutrition, in urban areas, because the way that, in poor communities in particular, the way that food's subsidized, it's the crap food that is most easily and readily available. And how do you, create better opportunities so that you actually can, get decent and affordable produce, everywhere you are, and locally grown as well, because that's where the nutrients actually are. So we are actually, we were planning on starting a green investment fund anyway. We were approached by a foundation to actually see if we would do something in Detroit. And we were excited anyway, and would figure out a way to do something there. And one of the ideas that we wanted to pitch first was a national brand of urban grown produce. Because really what we want to do is completely bring about the demise of the 3,000-mile salad. Like, there's no reason why, food should take that long to get to your plate. Americans, believe it or not, during World War II, 40% of American food production was actually grown locally, literally in America, and in things like victory gardens, like people's backyards or front yards and window boxes, things like that. 40% of American food production, that's how we ate. And so I don't think we need to be in, well, we are in a war, but I don't think we need to be in a war, to do that, to bring that home, when you actually can create the kind of like aquaponic greenhouses where you can grow both fish and also, vegetables, in a really high yield way that allows there to be like a 50 to 100 mile radius of where you get your food. So it literally ripens on the vine and then it's on your plate. And we was creating this model, starting the first one in Detroit, and creating a kind of franchisable model underneath it, so there'll actually be local ownership opportunities associated with it. So as a national brand, what we'll be doing is actually providing technical assistance, financing, and that kind of support, other supports that folks will need to do this work. But again, it's all about creating local opportunities for dollars to stay anywhere in a local community as well. We're also doing some work in New Orleans, and we first got invited by this guy's group, Make It Right Foundation. But the reason why we're staying is because of people like Mr. Taylor here. He's standing right at the base of the Beyond the New Bayou, and if anybody is from New Orleans, I apologize for my accent. And I'm sure that's not the way it's pronounced, but I'm a Yankee, I can't help it. But this area, what he was telling us the first time I met him was the story of this place behind him. And that when he was a kid, these were these amazing, majestic, cypress forests. These were this stuff, these wetlands were the nation's lungs, and liver to some extent. Because they really did, during serious, in particular, heavy storms, they would, attract the water and then release it slowly. So, and they were the nation's sponges, the whole Gulf Coast region. They had huge amounts of them. The difference between what happened to New Orleans during Hurricane Katrina and 40 years prior, Hurricane Betsy. Hurricane Betsy was actually a much stronger hurricane, much stronger. The difference is that what happened, all of these cypress forests that were there had been turned to this, because the federal government wanted to make it easy for to build a canal called Mr. Go, so to make it easier for oil barges to go up it. So all the salt water, came into these freshwater marshes and destroyed them. We're losing 2 football fields of wetlands a day right now. And every storm, weather in, the Gulf Coast is huge. It's impacting, in terms of damages, insurance, obviously quality of life. We're actually trying to figure out how we can actually develop a possibility to create kind of like a Roosevelt era, civilian conservation corps program where we're actually restoring the wetlands in these communities in ways that actually provide huge amounts of jobs, and so that we can actually create some stability in that area environmentally and economically as well. And I think it's really difficult for folks in many cases, especially when we're working in poor communities, to care about the environment if they're not caring about themselves. As a person, as a woman, from the South Bronx, one of the things that was most alarming was that, despite all the good things that were happening in the Bronx, and there were still some real serious issues that really just caused me great pain. In particular, the fact that our teenage pregnancy rate, young women and domestic violence rates were just climbing, high school dropout rates, et cetera. And it really flipped me out, and I wanted to do something about it, specifically, but like in a way that would actually allow young women to see themselves in a more positive light. And one of the ways that we were able to do it was like I actually have, I've brought some friends along. Kerry Washington, the actress, and Joy Bryant, also another one. We grew up within a mile of each other. And I'm from Hunts Point, Carrie's from Soundview, and Joy's from right near Yankee Stadium. And we're all homegirls, each and every one of us. But it was, but they too were alarmed, at what they'd seen. And none of us felt as though what we needed to do was think as though that we were the ones who made it and got out. And so we created an event to honor the great women that were already in our community doing really awesome work, and we called it Uptown Girls because that's what we call ourselves. And to honor, to celebrate, women, and also raise money to create some real huge murals that portrayed positive images of young women and women in the Bronx. So up here, Sonia Sotomayor unfortunately could not attend the event. But we've got women as diverse as housing developers. Actually, I know somebody who's here who knows Nancy Biberman from Wedco, who we honored. Rap artists, young women who actually made it and graduated through substance abuse programs, who were really changing their lives in amazing ways. And we had this amazing event to just honor them for what they were bringing to the world. And what we raised money for was, remember this building that I walked by almost every day of my life, was to build this 40-foot high mural. And it's entitled "Yes, She Can," and it depicts this really beautiful, watery, fabulous, life-giving image of women doing really beautiful work. And the name and the title of it, not the title, but the quote that inspired it is, as a young woman, dear friend of mine, and it's, "You don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one," because that's what I was hoping people would recognize. That's what they can do as well. And so this is one of my favorite quotes in the world. I hope, sirs, that you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote that in a letter from a Birmingham jail, and he addressed it to a bunch of members, white clergy, who were just telling him, "Dude, you gotta stop, man, or at least slow down. Take your time. It's like, this integration thing, its time is gonna come, but slow down." And this was, there was a little book published about it, but this is, I think, one of the most powerful lines about it, because we don't have the time to wait. Right now, what we have, is we are in such a moment of opportunity, I think, because there's enough, people understanding that the way that we did business for such a long time does not have to depend, on resting it on the backs of people who didn't ask for the damages of environmental injustices to happen. And we know that there are lots of costs that are not counted in terms of what environmental justice can bring to a community. But we also know that as we, in our quest to go toward a cleaner and greener economy that looks at everyone, as a participant and a contributor, we know that we can do the kind of things that are much greater and much more powerful than what, the robber barons of the past did, and are still doing to some extent. We know that we have some tremendous opportunities to think about how we can build the kind of future that we want in ways that allow everyone to participate and really be a loving part of it. And it is a kinder, gentler nation, I think, than what we're trying to do. And I think we can do this now because we're in the Obama era, and I'm not saying the man's perfect, and I'm more of my, because I'm actually not talking about the man right now. It's the, or his fabulous wife, who I think is perfect. I do, it's like, I'm sorry, I've got a picture in my office, it's a little silly. But I'm such a fan, it's horrible. But the Obama era is actually an acronym, and you're gonna see it on t-shirts pretty soon. It stands for Officially Behaving as Magnificent Americans. Because now is the time, because we can. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jennifer. My question is, how do you suggest college students become involved in changing their areas for the better to the environment?
Find folks that, I think that colleges are great places because most of them actually are, all of them are in communities, and there's often this sort of really interesting, I've said ivory tower mentality in many cases from what I've seen, and going out into the local community. There's obviously the stuff you can do on your own campuses because none of them are perfect, and you hope to develop all sorts of great ways to make their communities their college campus community more sustainable. But I love, hearing, as I've heard, from some of the students today, that they actually do make, inroads, into local communities and actually make themselves available, to be a part of a community, and listen to what folks are doing and really use their skills because you all have them. In order to support some of the things that are going on and doing it in a real respectful way that allows people to really feel as though you're a part of them, as opposed to you're there to tell them something they don't know. Yeah, but it's just being a good neighbor. Really, it's really nothing more than that.
Hi.
Hello.
How are you?
I love your hair. I'm sorry.
So I absolutely just adore the work that you're doing. I followed you for a really long time. And some of my interest is more international, but definitely here in the U.S., international, in Africa, on the continent, because similar things are happening on the continent. A lot of people moving in and taking over, tearing down forests,
Yeah.
So one of my questions was, what were some of the challenges you faced starting up your initiative, and how did you overcome those challenges?
The nice thing about the way that I started was that, I didn't come from an organizing background, so I had no idea what I was doing. And I really did. Ignorance was really wonderful. And honestly, I think that had I known some of the things that people were saying about me, I might have been a little less, out there. But I didn't know that there were people you weren't supposed to talk to. I didn't know. I really had no clue. And there were folks who were just looking back, I realized they thought I was insane. But I didn't know. So, and if you don't tell me what you think I'm insane, why would I think I was insane? Although some people did. But it was a really interesting dynamic, I think. But the hardest part was later on, especially as some of these ideas got momentum, that people were really traumatized. And speak to this young man's, point before. People were really dejected. And there was, I think, when anybody tried anything new, it was often perceived with incredible suspicion. And it's this is my neighborhood. It's I'm from Oneida Street. I live here. What do you think I'm gonna do? But we definitely got some of that. We definitely did. But then, I think we built up enough support, from other folks who were just Miss Carter's daughter, she's all right. And it worked. It lasted, and it still does. So I'm
that. But yeah, but it's hard, especially when you're working with folks who automatically feel like there's nothing good out there for them. So, and that it's not, that probably wasn't the hardest thing, but that was the most hurtful thing. The most hurtful thing. But yeah, like battling mayors that like, hate you is not fun. But you expect that. Yes, sir.
Could you talk just a little bit more about your conservation idea, your, oh gosh, I'm not saying it right.
Conservation, where?
In Detroit, no, in.
Whether we wanna, the public-private partnership, we wanna do it in New Orleans?
Civilian conservation.
Yeah, well, it's
Corps.
just, that's Roosevelt's, term, but the idea that, so much, the kind of, projects that were built like after the, death of the Great Depression, just to get people to work, they were building dams, they were building like, monuments, they were doing all sorts of stuff, right? And so now, if you think about just the inherent value that wetlands, and actually those type of natural systems can actually bring, to a region, to the country, how cool would it be, if we actually put people to work repairing those? Because right now, in their current state, they cost us money, lots. And if we thought about it, some of the things that actually helped create some of that stuff, like the dams in particular, probably wouldn't have been built in the first place, but now we know better. So why would we want to do some things like that? And there are folks that are thinking about that, but the question is, how do we like really, create the kind of momentum so that it's not only a piecemeal project, but it's like happening all over the Gulf Coast in some tremendous, tremendous ways. So it hasn't happened yet, but that's what we're putting out to the universe and to like everybody and their mother that we know, in hopes of creating the kind of partnership that can actually make it happen. Because it would have to be public and private.
Yeah.
Like, it's not going to be, the feds are not going to just say this is what's going to happen. We don't have that kind of, we don't have that kind of support just yet.
Right.
But we could. Yeah. I'm sorry. Okay, you're next. Go ahead.
In addition to the work that they're doing from the ground up, what kind of federal or state policies would you like to see happen?
I'd like to see a farm bill that actually supported food that was grown in healthy ways. That would be really helpful, and it would actually automatically help bring down the price of things like organic food, and that would be incredibly important. I'd really love to see real, much of the green jobs bill stuff actually go and really think about ways that support the kind of horticultural infrastructure projects that we're seeing right now, because those actually have very low barriers to entry with just a little bit of training, but that's not really been the focus of a lot of that work, or a lot of those policies, which is sort of annoying. And yes, yeah, I forgot.
You talked about Bogota and Colombia, and I was wondering if you had a model city that you actually model your own projects after, anything that's specific or anything.
Lots. Bogota, Colombia is absolutely one of them. I loved it because they created this incredible bus rapid transit system that became so popular that it was used by everybody with like, that was making $1 a day, or folks who were making lots and lots of money. It was that good of a project. They created greenways, especially in poor communities, and bikeways, so that anybody, there would be alternative forms of transportation that supported folks. I've definitely looked all over the country, all over the world, and what great conservation efforts can look like. Amsterdam obviously was a big thing, Copenhagen, places where they actually design cities in ways that are much more supportive of people, rather than, they put people first rather than cars, which I think is really, really important, and places that really use transit in a way that's smart and really sexy, and because transit can absolutely be sexy when it's done right. And the Bogota, Colombia, this is like the coolest bus you've ever been on. I loved it. So things like that.
Hi, I may have missed it, but I wanted to know how much would it cost to green your rooftop?
No, you didn't. I don't think I mentioned the figure. If you happen to be in New York City, you would get a $4.50 a square foot tax abatement, because that was the piece of legislation that we helped pass after we started working on that stuff. So you could bring it down to about $10 a square foot, for like 4 or 5 inches of growing medium, and really, sedum type plants, which is the kind of basic cover that you probably want.
Okay, and my second thought is, basically, you inspired me today. I come from North New Jersey, and in this city, it's pretty much like how, it's not as bad as the Bronx was when you were growing up, but I just remember, you know, it being very dirty and not a place that you wanted to grow up. And they recently built the Prudential Center there, and I came home and I looked at downtown, and they had trees, and they had all these things, because they have this Prudential Center. And it's just like, wow, you needed to bring in this major place to make the city look better so that we could bring in money. My third thought is, how do you combine bringing the ghetto and building self-esteem with girls? 'Cause that's what I want to do all my life.
Well, just the studies that are out there that show that there is an absolute relationship between, you know, having the presence of beautiful green things around and the way girls feel about themselves. I mean, it's biophilia, like people's love of nature. It's like, you know, we've lost that connection. And girls in particular, you know, I think respond really well when they, you know, understand that the world around them is actually a part of them and is actually something that needs to be nurtured the same way that they need to be nurtured. Because so many of us miss that. Like, it was just like, doesn't even register for so many of us. And, you know, that's the reasons why, you know, we wanted to present, you know, great, like, huge images, you know, of beautiful, powerful women, you know, colored our community was specifically for that. And the fact that we've seen so many young women, you know, go through our programs, you know, and other programs like, you know, this young woman, oh my God, I've watched this child grow up, and she works with another colleague of mine, it's a program called Rocking the Boat, and, you know, she was just a, you know, really beautiful, beautiful young woman, single mom, was doing her thing, but you watched her, like, as she went up in leadership in this particular program, and she got diesel, you know, and you watch these little girls, like, walk behind her, because they're just like, wow, like, you can, what? You know, you can do this work and, you know, be really beautiful and smart, and having those kind of examples are just such an amazing thing to see, and to give people opportunities to do that. It's about creating opportunities and showing people that it can be done. Even if it's a small little thing, do not underestimate, you know, what your example can mean to people. You have no idea who's watching you. All right. Okay, 1, 2.
Two more questions.
Okay.
Well, mine kind of connects to hers because, you know, I also am affiliated with Newark. My job allows me to basically travel through all of the wards in Newark on a daily basis. So I see the difference between the Prudential Center downtown Newark to the Blight in the South Ward. And the thing is that the Prudential Center, it's a privatized business, so of course they're gonna make it appealing to quote unquote outsiders. But has your consulting group ever found a way to try to collaborate with local government to help them realize this actually is beneficial to the general quality of life for its residents?
Yeah, I mean, especially, you know, if it's done in a way that where there's also an ownership stake, and I mean ownership, not necessarily like, you know, the folks, you know, in the surrounding area like own a piece of the Prudential, you know, center, but that was there, you know, local opportunities, you know, for folks to be, you know, to be gainfully employed, you know, are there opportunities for new businesses to be expanded so that, you know, the new business that comes in, much of it can actually be retained by local ownership. You know, are there incentives in place to support, you know, new entrepreneurs? You know, those are the type of things that do so much to instill, you know, decent will. Really, I mean, they pay themselves. They pay back, you know, so much. And those are the type of things that I'd actually like to see, you know, more of it in terms of the kind of work that we're doing, you know, around, you know, places that have actually been smart to hire us. You know, we're helping folks understand that those multiplier effects, like if a municipal government like starts to understand that, like, okay, you know, yeah, we're going to do the whole business attraction thing of bringing in a Prudential, because of course, you know, they got supported, you know, to come in and do that. But we're also going to make sure that the local people are going to benefit from the fact that these people are going to need services if they're here.
Have you ever received like interest from Newark, the township of Newark?
Actually, you know, when I met Corey the first time, he was like, would you move to Newark? And I was like, no. But I would love to talk with you more about that, absolutely.
Okay.
Cool. All right, pleasure. What?
Talk to me about coming to Newark.
I can't, who's talking? Oh, hi. Hello. Yeah.
me about coming to Newark. We run a Center for Urban Entrepreneurship and Economic Development. Naturally, I was gonna bring you to Newark, but Harriet wants you here first. But we do need to talk.
Okay.
Hi, first of all, I just wanted to say that I teach in the human ecology department here for the past several terms. I've been using your TED video. And after I show it, a dozen students come up to me and say, I had no idea. And thank you for showing me this video. And, so I encourage everyone to use it. Well, it's fabulous. Thank you. Secondly, I'm curious what sorts of reinvestment you've seen as a result of greening your neighborhood from the private sector.
One of the things that's really nice about doing the work that I've been doing, actually being able to travel around a lot around the country, as much as I have, is that the ideas that are out there, literally, just if people have no idea of the business idea, but I met a guy in Knoxville, Tennessee, who was on, literally the 4th generation, of this smart switch that he was doing in his garage, and didn't think to take it outside of it. It was just sort of like, take your dude. I was like, this could be really helpful. Things of that nature. And, and the thing that most really inspires me about the fact that we know that this stuff is out there, that the kind of companies that are, actually literally there's an index called the world's most ethical companies, that over, from the years 2002 to 2008, that those companies actually outperformed, the Standard & Poor, 500 companies. And because they were using, many of those companies were actually doing green things on their own. So much of our job is to actually identify those things and actually look for them and figure out ways to get private dollars, especially in some of the more, whether it's the urban agriculture thing in particular, but there's a lot of other things like that out there now, and then people are starting to see that there's money to be made. So I'm not all that worried about the private investment that's coming.
Regarding your localized farming initiatives, I'm curious, and I understand this is a very specific question, I understand you don't have the specific statistical knowledge necessarily to answer it, but have you found that homegrown produce, including cost of labor, can be comparable to, supermarket produce?
What we're going to be doing specifically is creating enough volume so that we're actually selling directly to the supermarkets.
Okay.
Yeah, and doing it locally so that you're actually reducing much of your transportation costs. We're not totally finished crunching the numbers just yet, but the transportation is huge. And reducing that down, and actually we're figuring out ways to actually, create better opportunities to even take not just the actual operations, off the grid, but actually using electric, 2-step vehicles, things of that nature. So we're actually reducing our energy costs even more. So that's a really important thing that we have to keep in mind going forward.
So short answer to that question would be that it's certainly possible that there would be a certain underlying infrastructure required.
Oh, absolutely. No, we've got to grow a huge volume. I mean, that's why we're doing it aquaponically with greenhouses, so that you actually have 4 growing seasons a year, so that you actually have, literally, like the picture that I showed of the guy literally having to climb a ladder, to get stuff. I mean, that's, you're not going to get that, in a garden. You're just not. But, it's not uncommon to get ridiculously high yields of greens or whatever, or lots of other types of stuff, hydroponically or aquaponically.
Oh, so the aquaponic stuff would be a separate enterprise, it wouldn't be a homegrown kind of thing?
Oh, no, none of this is homegrown. Oh, no, yeah, totally, yeah. Sorry about that.
I think we're going to have to wrap it up. What do you want to do?
I'm gonna take a couple more.
Okay, let's make quick questions, and then we'll get these 3 people in quickly.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much.
Hi, I apologize in advance if this might get a little, I have a comment and a question. I just want to give a comment to you guys all in here tonight, that, you can make a change, you can make a difference. Because Majora's out here, she's demonstrating what she did. Every one of us, we were inspired here tonight. And I just want to tell you that, I come from a unique background. I'm some, middle-aged Chinese boy whose parents worked in a restaurant in Trenton. And from that, being an MTV guided child, I didn't get out of my fix until I came to college. I almost didn't go to college. And now I'm on a national level working with a group called Engineers Without Borders. And I'm hoping to create an initiative where we normally do projects internationally, but because that is such a huge cost, we're hoping to initiate, start an initiative that does projects locally in the state because it saves on travel costs and such. So every one of you guys can do something innovative and, you know, on your own. You just have to do it. So that's what I want to say as a comment. And my question is,
Quick question.
thank you, sorry. My question is, I apologize in advance if it's a little deep, but, you know, anything you do, there's economics behind it. That's why you founded the Majora Carter group, sorry. And this I know it's a for-profit arm that allows people to obtain jobs from low-income areas and such, but in a society where our banking industry can create such situations where the wealthy actually accumulates such immense amounts of wealth and it stays that way, that actually has negative effects on the environment because people with so much power and wealth don't see the everyday things that we do. So what are your thoughts on that and what can we do to change it?
So that's why we're looking at the development of various opportunities in the green economy as a way to equalize that and really be much more, you have to be disruptive in terms of, you know, whether, like an example of the urban agriculture that we were doing. We want to disrupt the way that food is actually grown and distributed in this country. If you have a whole bunch of local entities that there is a community ownership stake in it, that's really disruptive. You know, people actually will be stockholders, you know, in that model. That alone, you know, is a way to show that there are different ways of doing these kind of things. So that's just one example, but the whole idea is that we need to see more of that happening, and there's going to be many different opportunities around that. So, thanks.
Hi. I live in West Harlem, like really close by Columbia, and you know, recently they've been buying up a lot of property, and you know they're fixing up everything, but they're changing the neighborhood, making it prettier, but it's also it has a negative effect on the residents because they're going up on the rent, and people are getting kicked out of the money. If this program is that the effect?
You know, I often get the displacement question. It's a really good example. One of the things and one of the reasons why I've taken, such a hard position on economic empowerment, for local residents is that, when people are economically empowered, it's much harder to push them around, period. And that's why the whole idea of how do you create local ownership and investment in your own community is it's just something that I'm so committed to doing. Whether it's in the South Bronx, whether it's in Northeastern North Carolina, I don't care where it is, but there are models that need to happen. I mean, that's the problem with Columbia. It was just like, we're going to have to buy everything we want, and we did it, and the city helped us. And they should be really ashamed of themselves. And I as a New Yorker, I'm really embarrassed by that and furious. But I think that the more we can, create opportunities that allow people to feel as though they can't be pushed around that easily, I think the better off we're all going to be. But we need more opportunities like that. Thanks.
Hi, I'm from Brooklyn, Marcy, to be exact, and I've experienced a lot of restoration sites and stuff. I saw them make things prettier, but I've also experienced a lot of times like they just leave it alone and it just deteriorates and worse than it started off.
Absolutely.
So what do you do in places like the Bronx where you pick that up? Are you maintaining it? Like, what do you do to
No, we
maintain
forced the city to do it.
Okay.
We were like, you know what? I did a whole lot of my job, your job. And part of it was we went to the point of actually figuring out ways to first we started, hiring people to do some of that maintenance, because there was this whole thing like, in New York City, there's like, if you don't have money to maintain a park, then, we can't really build it. And it was just like, well, that leaves parks only in wealthy neighborhoods. And do you really want to go down that road? And it was really, really difficult. And we worked really hard to force the city to see just how egregiously irresponsible and frankly racist that was. So, and we took every moment that we could to, first to talk sense, into folks, and then when it didn't work, it was just like, I was at press conferences with the mayor and was just saying stuff like, this is what we understand, that this is not going to happen because,
we're not wealthy enough to provide you, you know, with a fund to maintain our parks. It's like, we're not Museum Mile, you know, we're not, you know, Chelsea Piers, we're not these places, you know, we have bodegas and auto parts stores. And, it was a really difficult thing, but really, you know, part of it is just like very, very, very local. There's always money, always. But if community members don't like push, it will deteriorate. You're right. I absolutely agree with you. Take care, sweetie. Good luck.
Join me in thanking